reading this morning from the Gospel according to St. Luke, the 24th chapter, verses 13 through 35. A story about taking a walk. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a mighty prophet in deed and word before God and all people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. However, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning when they did not find his body there. They came back and told us they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going away. But they urged him strongly and said, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is almost over." So he went to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he broke bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while we were talking, while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. And they were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made to them, known to them in the breaking of Well, this Christmas I purchased myself a gift. Not that someone else wasn't going to buy me a gift, but I decided to purchase myself one. It's called a Jawbone Up. Anybody know what I'm talking about? You don't have a clue. A couple people do. Well, I wear it on my wrist. Sometimes with the YMCA, I wonder if people think that I'm on home arrest. Kind of has that look, doesn't it? But it's not. It's kind of an amazing tool. If you want to see what it looks like, it keeps records of your sleep patterns. It tells you how much you sleep, how much REM sleep you've had, how much deep sleep you've had, how many times you wake up during the night, for how long periods. Plus, the other part that I really like is it calculates every step you take during the day. So you'll know when you plug it into your computer at night before you go to bed how much walking you've done. And as a sidebar, I'm finding that it's easier to get close to my daily step goal by having it on here, especially now that the cold winter months are over. Yesterday, I think I ended up with 12,000 steps, and my goal is to try to get 12 or 10,000 in each day. And each morning when I wake up, I plug up into my computer, and it notifies me how long I slept and how many steps I'd taken the previous day. And it's a pretty interesting piece of equipment. Plus, each morning it has 3 or 4 tidbits of information. You punch a button on the computer, and it shoots up some kind of screen and tells you some scientific knowledge that allows you to kind of ponder and contemplate and get your day going. Most of those obviously have to do with health and nutrition and proper sleep. I guess it's no surprise then, at least for me, that it's good to know that I'm actively doing something to make myself healthy for whatever time it is I have left here on the earth. I'm at least pursuing some ways of being healthy. And one of those ways is simply walking. I no longer can run, so I try to walk each day. I was looking up some information on Google, and I found an article of all places. It was in Women's Day, which I normally don't read, but the article happened to be there. And it was actually information they were sharing from research from the Cleveland Clinic. In that Cleveland Clinic research, they claim that you can add 2.2 years to your life if you walk 30 minutes each day. So if you take a walk for 30 minutes each day, on average, people can add 2.2 years to their life. Pretty good stuff. I actually have that link written down here, so if somebody wants it where they can read the entire article, because I think the article is something, 10 things you can do to add 20 years to your life. So, some interesting stuff to try to do that. So if you're interested in that, let me know. You can add a lot of years to your life by doing things. So basically what the article, for our purposes, is saying is that walking is good. Walking is good. Now I realize that some people exercise regularly. I try to make it to the YMCA almost every day. But I'm also aware of the fact that there are plenty of people who don't exercise regularly, right? Recently, I had a friend tell me that he had purchased a health club membership last year. And he said it cost him about $400 for that annual membership fee. Then as our conversation went on, he exclaimed to me, I haven't lost a pound. I haven't lost a pound. Eventually he figured out that simply belonging to a health club doesn't help you lose weight. You actually have to go to the health club and work out. Unfortunately, for many of us, that's what our exercise routine looks like, right? We buy a piece of fancy equipment. My neighbors who are deceased now, but have left most of their furniture for the young couple who bought there, they had exercise bikes, step masters. I mean, they had like 5 or 6 pieces of equipment. They never used that stuff ever. They bought it and it sat on their back porch. And unfortunately, many of us do that. We think about taking a walk, but then we don't. Taking a walk is a good thing. For me personally, it's a time when I ponder my life. You know, I delve into the anxieties that might be building up in me, the fears that I have, the doubts that I have, and it's a chance for me to work those things out as I walk around. So walking is a good thing. Now, not long ago, I drove by a church on the northeast side of town, and I've probably been by it at least 1,000 times. It's a squat brick building. The bricks are beginning to show their age, and some of them are kind of falling off the building. We know what that's about, right? The shingles on the roof are starting to slide off and show their weather, and the rickety stairs outside, well, they don't look all that safe. This church seemed pretty odd, actually, when you think about it, because it was just out of place, because just about a block away or so is Butler University. And here, Butler University is brimming with life, and the expectations of being 20 years old holds for people. Huh? They're dancing with vibrancy out in the mall, and their conversations are about what their life's going to be, and they're full of hope. And this building, who's deteriorating, just didn't seem like it belonged there. Because right next to this vibrant place is this beleaguered church, pretty much filled with memories of the past. It represented, I thought, the institution of the church. As my research that I've been working with my doctorate has revealed to me, it's kind of falling apart. And so too many of our churches are filled with dusty hymnals and creeds and not reaching out to God's people appropriately. While this particular church once had a thriving Sunday school and thriving attendance with multiple classes and multiple worship services, the pews were packed, it had lost its meaningfulness in this community. At one time, it was a meaningful influence on the surrounding area, doing ministry with all different ages effectively. But the church, which had once been the hope and the strength of the neighborhood, no longer was. It had been there for 100 years or more, and it had started to fail up until the day that it closed its doors. Then a new young pastor from a startup church over in Broad Ripple must have driven by the church too and scratched his chin and said, this would be a great place for a new church start. What possibly could make this guy think that? Here's a church that the building's starting to decay, the bricks are worn, the roof's worn. Here's a church that had been there for 100 years that was closing its doors, saying we can't make it any longer, we become irrelevant. And yet this young pastor says, this would be a great place to start a new church. How could that dream for a new church where one had not been able to make it, where the people in the church had finally thrown their arms up and said, we give. The place had become a place of darkness instead of a place of light. What possibly could this pastor be thinking? It reminds me a lot of our scripture this morning, where we find two men walking the road to Emmaus. In some moments, we assume they have spoken. In other times, when they're walking along, they just shared silence, probably whispering to one another about all the dreams that were lost. Their Jesus of Nazareth, who had worked wonders and worked as a witness to God, was now dead. He was a very embodiment for their hope in life. He was a very embodiment of hope for their entire culture. He was the center of their dreams. Everything they had hoped for, and now it was gone. And their man joined them on their journey, on their walk, I would say. And being very aware of the deep sadness these men were having, he asked them, what are you discussing as you walk along here? Are you mad? They say to him, haven't you heard what occurred in Jerusalem? And the men then proceed to pour out the grief from their heart. They start to share those painful reminiscences of the miracles they saw in Jesus, the healing and the renewal, the hope that had been born again in people's lives that now seem to be coming to naught. The miracle, the Messiah, is dead, is gone. And on top of that, his body's missing. What good was it for them to have a dream? What good was it for them to have hope? What would redeem Israel now? Where was their future? We have to be honest, the American church is changing. There's no doubt about that. Who we once were, we are no longer. Buildings built for the glory of God and the service of man stand empty and closed, and only a few remnant of the faithful remain behind. We still are buoyed by our tradition and by our faith, and there still are some of us who dare to dream of hope again. But for most churches across our nation, the journey seems dark and dreary. The good news seems like old news. In the headlines you read in articles and books just scream about the mainline churches and their decline. Statistics spout the decline of Christianity as we once knew it. Our children, our grandchildren don't seem very crazy about our faith. I think I've shared before that millennials from the Pew Research Institute and from the Barna Research Institute say only about 17% of millennials, that are people that are born from 1980 on, even attend institutional church. 17%. How can we speak of hope in this journey of faith in a time like this? Are we crazy? Our journey seems to be overshadowed like that day long ago on a Friday when Jesus hung on a cross and was entombed. The journey continued for those two men accompanied by the unnamed stranger, and for some strange reason, the stranger spoke up. How silly you two are. Wasn't this supposed to happen? It's what the prophet said would happen. And as they continued walking, the man interpreted to them all the things that had occurred regarding him. And they neared a village, and he was about to go on, and they asked him to stay and invite him to come and sit with them and have a meal. And then as he broke bread with them and he blessed it, they came to their senses, and they recognized, this is our Christ. It's easy for us to mourn that the church is dead, that our young adults are good, or so it's been said. No one wants to come to, say, Olive Branch Christian Church anymore. But then this unnamed stranger appears, saying, death is not won, my friends. Death is not won. Once a year, hundreds of young adults gather with the Academy of Preachers to proclaim the good news, to gather in fellowship and to return to the world reunited and reignited. Friends, death is not won. Hope is still brimming across the church, and young adults are committing themselves to service and justice and equality and the good news. Maybe in a way different than what we expect. Maybe in a way different than those two men walking the road to Emmaus expect. But nonetheless, taking a walk, a journey in the faith and the fellowship with God. In seminary classes that I attend and sit in sometimes with graduate students, and I'm working my doctorate, I see young adults and older adults and everyone in between dreaming these dreams of hope and renewal for the church at large. Because this unnamed stranger is walking with them on their journey. Friday morning isn't the end of the tale, folks. Friday morning isn't the end of the story. Friday morning isn't the end of the walk. You know, I visited that rickety old church on the north side near the Butler campus recently. The little church with the shingles falling and the bricks disintegrating. And it rang with voices, young and old. Now, they started off as a small congregation, maybe 20 so people were going there. However, that has changed, and the roof is repaired, and the hymnals are dusted off, and the pews are glistening, and the eyes of the people filling those pews are open once again. They have grown now to over a few hundred people attending. And interestingly enough, you're going to be hard-pressed to find anybody over 40 years old in those pews. They recognize that the God of all hope is still with them. Maybe in a new way, but still with them. In our individual lives, we have such darkness and such fear that is reminiscent of the two who walked along the road to Emmaus. And whether we like it or not, there's going to be times in our life, as individuals or as a corporate group, we're going to have to take those walks. Those walks that leave us with anxiety and fear and doubt and a loss of hope. It might be something like the story I've shared about University Park Christian Church Disciples of Christ who closed their doors, but now is Common Ground Christian Church relishing in a newfound promise. Or it might be your personal story about a loved one you have lost, or about a job that you have lost, or about a relationship that has been broken. While those things may die for us, while those things may leave us in fear and doubt, may leave us feeling hopeless, In Christ, there is always the hope of a new resurrection, for a new beginning, for a new life out of ashes. Friends, there are new pathways to walk. Some of them we already know what they are, and we do them here at Olive Branch Christian Church, reaching out to our neighborhood with a food pantry and meals and vacation Bible school and an urban garden and welcoming another congregation into our building. And there's still other ways, though, but we don't know what they are yet. We don't know what it is God has planned for us. But we do know this, that the darkness of Calvary's cross is not the end. This Jesus, this stranger who came and walked with people who didn't even recognize him, is still walking with us today. And as members of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, each week we gather at this table because we know that we still have that hope. Every time I get up here and I break that bread and we drink of that wine, it's letting us know that this stranger is still walking with us, is still giving us hope. Whatever it is in our life that seems overwhelming, that leaves us hopeless, that leaves us in fear, leaves us with anxiety, with doubt, that this stranger is still walking with us saying, "Oh, you silly people, don't you get it? I'm alive. I'm alive in you. You can share this good news of love, this good news of hope, because death is not the end." We're all asked to sit at God's table just as they invited Jesus to sit with them and break bread. And they said, "Our hearts were burning while he talked to us on the road." What a great phrase that is. Was it not us whose heart were burning while he talked to us on the road? Isn't that great to know that we can have such hope that our hearts are on fire? That we want to share with other people, everybody we meet, not just if they come into our building, but everywhere we reach out to, that we can share with them that love and that hope that God's intended for us through Jesus Christ. Our hearts are on fire. I want to share that hope, and I hope you do too. Here at the table this morning, I hope you will find strength for the journey, that you will feel renewed hope if you're feeling anxiety or doubt or fear this day. I hope that you will feel like we can walk toward a new future together, what it is God has planned for us, because this stranger overcame death and still walks with us. This is the Word of God for the people of God.
Praise be to God.